It's about to get interesting, so subscribe and hit like so you don't miss the top content.
I never thought my life could change so drastically. It all started when my wife, Emily, decided to take a new job. We lived in a small town in Colorado where everyone knew each other and career opportunities were limited. Emily had always dreamed of something more than working at the local library, where she had worked for the past 3 years. She wanted to evolve, to try something new, and I supported her fully. After all, we both realized that sooner or later something would have to change if we wanted to secure a decent future for ourselves. My best friend, Jake, was the person who offered her that opportunity. Jake and I had been friends since college. He was always an ambitious and driven guy, and after graduation, he moved to Denver where he started his own digital marketing company. His business was booming and he often called me to join him, but I always declined. I liked my quiet life in a small town where I worked as a teacher at a local school. I didn't want to change anything, but Emily seemed to think otherwise. When Jake offered her the position of marketing manager at his company, she accepted immediately. I remember her coming home that night, her eyes burning with excitement. She talked about how this was going to be a new phase in her life, how she would finally be able to realize herself. I was happy for her, but at the same time I felt a slight anxiety. Jake was my best friend, but I knew he had always had a bit of a crush on Emily. Back in college, he'd admitted to me that he liked her, but I hadn't given it much thought at the time. Emily and I were already together, and Jake seemed okay with that, but now that they would be working together, I couldn't help but wonder if it would be a problem. Emily started working for Jake 2 weeks after she got the offer. Things went well for the first few weeks. She came home tired but happy, telling me about her new responsibilities, how much she enjoyed working on the team, and how she was learning something new every day. I could see her blossoming and that made me happy, but gradually I began to notice changes in her behavior. She started staying late at work more often, sometimes coming home late at night. When I asked her what she was doing, she said they had important meetings or deadlines. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me was keeping me on edge. Then she started mentioning Jake more often in conversations. At first it was just stories about work, but then she started talking about how he helped her with projects, how they had lunch together, or how he gave her career advice. I tried not to show my jealousy, but I was growing increasingly anxious inside. One night when Emily was late at work again, I decided to pick her up. I didn't tell her about it. I just got in my car and drove to Jake's office. When I pulled up to the building, I saw them together. They were standing at the entrance, laughing and talking like they were old friends. I didn't know what to feel. On one hand, I was glad Emily had found common ground with my best friend. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on between them than just a working relationship. I didn't bother getting out of the car, just sat there and watched them until they said goodbye and Emily got into her car. When she got home, I pretended like nothing had happened, but there was a storm of emotions raging inside me. I didn't know how to approach this conversation, afraid that my suspicions would ruin our relationship, but I also realized that I couldn't continue to live in ignorance. I lay in bed for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling. Emily slept next to me, her breathing calm and steady. I looked at her and thought about how much I loved her, and how much I was afraid of losing her. I knew that sooner or later I would have to talk to her about everything that was bothering me, but for now, I decided to wait, hoping that my fears were unfounded. A few more weeks passed, and my suspicions only grew stronger. Emily became even more distant. She was absent from work more and more often, and when she was home, her thoughts seemed to be far away. We didn't talk as much as we used to. She no longer told me about her plans or dreams, and even our regular evening dinner conversations became shorter and more formal. I felt a wall growing between us, but I didn't know how to break it down. One night, when Emily was late for work again, I decided to check her phone. I had never done anything like this before, but my anxiety had reached a fever pitch. I knew it was wrong, that it was a violation of her privacy, but I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. I picked up her phone, which she had left on the kitchen table, and started flipping through the messages. I didn't find anything suspicious at first. Most of the correspondence was work-related or with her friends, but then I came across a chat with Jake. The messages were innocent at first glance, discussing projects, jokes, plans for meetings, but the further I leafed through, the more a sense of unease gripped me. They texted each other almost every day, even late at night or early in the morning, and while there was nothing overtly suspicious in their words, the tone of their correspondence seemed too close. I put my phone down and sat on the couch, feeling my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I couldn't find any evidence of cheating, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on between them. I decided that I had to talk to Emily, but how to approach that conversation, I didn't know. The next day, I decided to take action. When Emily got home from work, I suggested that we talk to her. We sat down at the kitchen table and I started by telling her how I felt. I told her that I could feel us drifting apart and that it hurt me to see her sinking more and more into her work, leaving me by the wayside. I didn't mention her correspondence with Jake, but I made it clear that I was concerned about their closeness. Emily listened to me silently, her face impenetrable. When I finished, she sighed and said that she understood my feelings, but that her work was really important to her. She said that Jake had become not only a boss to her, but also a friend, and that she appreciated his support. She asked me not to be jealous and to trust her. I wanted to believe her, I really wanted to, but something inside of me was holding me back. I sensed she was hiding something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. We ended the conversation on an uncertain note, and I was left with the feeling that there was still an invisible wall between us. A few days later, I decided to talk to Jake. We met at a bar, just like old times. He was just as I remembered him, confident, charismatic, with a slight smile on his face. We talked about life, about work, and I gently brought up the subject of Emily. I said I'd noticed how close they'd become, and that I wondered how he felt about it. Jake looked at me with surprise and then laughed. He said that I was overthinking things, that Emily was just a good employee, and that he appreciated her as a professional. He added that he understood my feelings, but that I had nothing to worry about. His words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. That night, I lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. Emily slept next to me, but I felt like we were in different worlds. I didn't know what to do next. I loved her more than anything in the world, but I also realized that I couldn't continue to live in constant anxiety. I knew that sooner or later I would have to make a choice, either trust her and let go of my fears, or admit that our relationship had reached a dead end. A few more weeks passed, and the tension in our relationship only grew. I tried to be patient, tried to trust Emily, but every time she was late for work or her phone rang late at night, my heart clenched with anxiety. I felt like I was losing her, and the feeling was unbearable. One night when Emily was late to work again, I decided to go to extreme measures. I got in my car and drove to Jake's office. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to find there, but I felt I had to see everything with my own eyes. When I pulled up to the building, I noticed that the office lights were still on. I parked nearby and waited. After a while, I saw Emily and Jake walking out of the building together. They were laughing and talking, and their demeanor seemed a little too casual. I felt my heart start to beat faster. I got out of the car and followed them slowly, trying to stay out of sight. They headed for the nearest bar, and I followed them. I sat down at a table in the corner from where I could watch them, but they didn't see me. They ordered drinks and continued talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their gestures and facial expressions spoke for themselves. They looked like they were more than just coworkers or friends. There was some kind of connection between them that I couldn't ignore. I sat there, feeling my heart being torn apart. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I wanted to go up to them and find out, but on the other hand, I was afraid to hear the truth that I thought I already knew. In the end, I decided to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. When I got home, Emily wasn't there yet. I sat down on the couch and waited. My mind was filled with thoughts and I couldn't find peace. I thought about how things had changed, about how we had become strangers to each other. I thought about Jake, about how he, my best friend, could betray me like this. But most of all, I thought about what I would lose if all of this turned out to be true. Emily came home late. She looked tired, but happy. When she saw my face, her smile disappeared. She asked me what was wrong, and I couldn't help myself. I told her everything, about my suspicions, about how I'd been following her, about what I'd seen at the bar. I expected her to make excuses or get angry, but instead she just sat next to me and sighed. She said she understood my feelings, but that I had misunderstood. She explained that Jake had indeed become an important person to her, but not in the way I thought. She said that he had helped her believe in herself, that he had supported her in difficult moments, and that she was grateful for that, but she also said that her heart belonged to me, and that she would never betray me. I wanted to believe her, I really wanted to, but something inside me still doubted. I knew that our relationship would never be the same again, that there would always be that shadow of mistrust between us, but I also knew that I loved her, and that I was willing to fight for our relationship. We agreed to go to therapy to try to sort out our feelings and rebuild trust. It wasn't easy, but we both realized it was the only chance we had to save our marriage. After our conversation and the decision to see a therapist, I was hopeful that things would get better. I wanted to believe that we could overcome this crisis, that our love would be stronger than suspicion and mistrust, but the more I tried to convince myself of this, the more I could feel the anxiety growing inside me. The sessions with the therapist were not easy. We discussed everything: our fears, our resentments, our expectations. I tried to understand Emily, tried to accept her point of view, but every time she talked about her work, about Jake, I found myself still hurting. I couldn't just erase those moments from my memory, those moments that planted doubt in my heart. I wanted to believe that her feelings for me hadn't changed. She tried to spend more time with me, saying she wanted to rebuild our connection, but something between us was already broken. We still slept in the same bed, had dinner at the same table, but now I felt like there was a completely different person next to me, or perhaps it was me who had changed. One night when she was late for work, I caught myself thinking that I was no longer looking forward to seeing her as much as I used to. Instead, I just sat in the living room, staring into the darkness outside the window, and tried to sort out my feelings. I remembered how things used to be, the ease of our conversations, the laughter, the long walks under the stars. It all seemed a distant past now. I tried to find evidence of my rightness in her actions or, on the contrary, to convince myself that my suspicions were groundless. But that was the biggest problem. I couldn't trust my own feelings anymore. I didn't know if she was deceiving me or if I was drowning in my own fears. A few more weeks passed. Therapy continued, but I felt that it was not providing the relief I wanted. It was like we were stuck in a never-ending circle of conversations about trust, but I still couldn't feel truly confident. Emily was trying, but I could see that she was tired too. A tense silence hung between us that seemed louder than any words. At some point, I realized that I couldn't live in this state anymore. I couldn't keep fighting myself, couldn't keep doubting every minute about the woman with whom I had once felt like the happiest person on earth. Perhaps she really was telling the truth. Maybe everything that was happening existed only in my head. But even if that was the case, was it worth it to stay in a relationship where I no longer felt peace? That night I realized for the first time that maybe it was time to make a choice, and that choice wasn't about whether Emily was to blame, but whether I was capable of trusting again. Because sometimes it wasn't betrayal that ruined a relationship, it was the inability to regain that trust, and that fear seemed worse than any betrayal. After our conversation, I really tried to trust Emily. We started seeing a family psychologist, trying to restore the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. I wanted to believe that all our problems were just a product of my jealousy and fears. I was able to convince myself of that at first, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The therapy sessions gave us temporary relief. We started talking again, trying to be honest with each other, but I felt that this honesty was incomplete. Sometimes she would look at me as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. I tried to ignore it, but those moments kept me going. After a few weeks, I started to feel like things were getting better. Emily started spending more time at home, paying attention to me. We started cooking dinner together, watching movies in the evenings, discussing plans for the future. I wanted to believe that we were on the right track. But then one detail happened that shattered all my illusions. That afternoon, I accidentally saw her cell phone left unattended on the kitchen table. The screen lit up with an incoming message, and I noticed the sender's name, Jake. At that moment, something shivered inside me. I knew I shouldn't be reading other people's correspondence, that we should have trust, but some force made me pick up my phone. What I saw dispelled all my doubts. Their correspondence had been going on for weeks. Unlike the past messages, these were full of hidden innuendos and emotions. I read them and felt an icy emptiness growing inside me. They weren't just meeting for work, they were talking about things I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't just a friendship, not just a collegial relationship. I couldn't believe it, but there was no point in denying the obvious. I wasn't in her messages. Our life wasn't there. There wasn't even a hint of the family we were trying to rebuild. She was living another life, one where there was no room for me. When Emily came home, I could no longer play the role of someone who didn't know the truth. I didn't yell, I didn't make a scene. I just put her phone on the table and looked her in the eye. She understood without words. There was no surprise in her gaze, more like relief, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She said she wanted to tell me, but she was afraid that things had gone too far and she didn't know how to get out of it, that she didn't mean to hurt me. I nodded silently. I didn't need any more explanations. I already knew the truth. That night I packed my things. As I left, I felt no anger, only tiredness and emptiness. The love I felt for Emily was gone the moment I saw her correspondence. I didn't know what was next for me, but one thing was certain: the life we had was gone. A few days later, I filed for divorce. Jake was no longer my friend. Emily was no longer my wife. I left town, leaving everything behind. It was the end of our story, the one I had feared, but which was probably inevitable.